your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
Audio Jungle.
Hey, good evening, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And Matt, this week we're going to tackle a topic that's typically reserved for sci-fi films or fantasy films, but do have some elements of horror in them. And there's some movies made lately that really try to tackle this theme and bring it into the horror world, and that's Terror Through Time. And we're going to look at some time travel and some time loop movies from the horror genre. What's your thoughts on this topic?
Well, I agree. Time travel is very sci-fi specific due to its technological nature. But I think philosophically and psychologically, I think people can relate to it so much because as a species, I think what separates us is our ability to have our minds exist through time, right? And so we're able to, look at have thoughts about future actions of things that might happen that haven't happened yet and see how that might play out and then decide if we're going to do that. Or we can have some kind of traumatic experience in our life and we get older and we can reinterpret that past thing that happened to us and it changes us in the present, right? And so we can take our mind and thought and then change how we act in the present. And so we have this ability to have our mind exist through time. And I think that's why the time travel subject can be so interesting. As goofy as it gets with technology, there is something about it that we can relate to at a very substrate mental level.
And there's been a lot of good movies, some great movies in over time travel. Just not a lot of them were in the horror genre, but
yeah, I think we've yet to have that Back to the Future horror movie.
Right. Interesting point you make about humans and their relationship to time. I just realized now I've never seen another animal carrying a day planner.
Right.
So you're dead on with that one.
A wolf won't sit there and be like, hey, maybe we should save some of this meat for later. They just eat it all, and hopefully we get another one later. They don't know that, they just kind of, that's just how animals are.
Hey, you want to get together and howl at the moon next week? Yeah, sure. I'm free.
I do that Fridays anyways. It's
Our first movie in this topic is a movie called Triangle from 2009, directed by Christopher Smith. And this was, I don't want to say controversial, but when this movie came out, there was a lot of varying feedback. One group of people in the camp that it was clever, it was creative, the twists and turns really kept you on your feet. And there was some people out there that said, this movie's confusing as heck, and I don't understand what's going on.
I felt like I knew it was going to happen every turn of this movie, but I think it was it didn't surprise me at all. I was like, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. But it was executed well, and they didn't pander to the audience. They didn't try to be too clever where it's annoying. I just thought it was well made. Oh, this is the execution of the movie. And it kind of, I was like, all right, I went along for it.
It's funny watching it a second time for this show. And knowing the outcome, it's like one of those movies where now you see a lot of clues, some of which you might have caught the first time through, but many you didn't.
Yeah, I like movies like that. That's because it has good replay value. You can watch it again and enjoy it.
We start with our main character, Jess, and she is getting her son, Tommy, ready for their day, trying to get him cleaned up and ready to leave. And Tommy has autism. He's a special needs child, and there's obviously frustrations that come with that and difficulties that make her life very challenging. The doorbell rings. She answers it. There's no one there. So then they pack up and go. And she arrives at a marina without him, saying he's at school. And she goes sailing with a group of friends, people she knows, acquaintances. But
she looks distraught. She looks real distraught. Yeah.
She's very tired, haggard. She struggles to remember things. And in fact, when Victor, as they're walking down the dock, Victor asks about her son. She's like, she pauses, and then she's like, hey, he's in school.
Very dazed. Yeah.
And then Victor's like, it's Saturday. And then Greg, her real friend, comes out and is like, he's a special needs kid. He goes to school every day. But it's weird. It's like immediately disorienting, right?
Yeah. It reminded me of I was like, oh, that's how my dad thought of me when I was younger. It's
Oh, wow.
where's your kid? It's at school. It's Saturday. I don't know. He's somewhere.
He's somewhere. Yeah. Of course, they go out on the sailboat and a storm hits. They call for help on the radio, call the Coast Guard, and they hear a frantic woman interrupt their transmission. And she's just saying, everyone is dead. Everyone is dead. And then they can't reach her back. So that's a curious thing.
Yeah.
The storm worsens and capsizes their sailboat. And one of the party, Heather, is lost at sea, just lost and gone forever.
Yeah, the boat tips over and they're all swimming back to it, and Heather's gone. Yeah.
Heather's gone. So we have Jess, we have Greg, her friend, we have Victor, who's a kind of a ship's mate that kind of lives on the boat with.
He's like
Greg.
the dollar store Channing Tatum.
Yeah, well, it's Liam Hemsworth.
Oh, okay, all right.
Soon to be the Witcher for you.
Yeah.
And a couple, Sally and Downey. So they're all floating on the bottom of the ship, waiting for help. While they're waiting, a large ocean liner comes into view and travels near enough them that they can all reach over and board the ship. They see somebody up in the upper level when the ship is approaching, but when they get on, they can't find anyone.
Yeah, I had to pause that and rewind it, and I was just like, "Who are they seeing?" I couldn't see it.
Yeah, it was very, and it was meant to be like, oh wait, was there something there? What was that?
Like a shadow.
Jess is having a sense of deja vu. She's like, I know this place. I've been here before. In the dining hall, there's food. They grab some fruit.
She finds her keys, right?
Yeah, and she also sees someone. She finds her own keys, and they're like, well, how could your keys get here? And then they think, well, Heather must have found your keys and brought them on board with her, which, Heather's not going to find your keys. They're going to
right. Yeah, that's why we couldn't find her out there, because she swam up here first, and she's in here, and that's what. Yeah.
Jess sees someone out of the corner of her eye, but that person disappears, and she follows her. And I don't know if you caught this. They go into one of the cabin rooms. And it was room 237, a little nod to The Shining.
I did. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And in the mirror, in blood, is a message, go to the theater.
Which is also another nod to Red Rum, right?
Yeah. Yep. I'm like, oh, very well. Very nice.
I liked it. Yeah, I liked it. I always like a good nod to another classic.
Sure. Sally and Downey go to the theater, and they're seeing blood splatters along the way. Jess goes back to the dining hall, and the food that was there is now all spoiled. Like it's been sitting out for a month. And it very strange, because they were just there a short time ago.
Yeah, and there's like no one there. And
Victor comes staggering in, and he's bloody, and he attacks Jess, and they're fighting. Jess sticks her finger in the hole in the back of his head, and that finishes him off.
It's real gooey and gushy too. They make the sound effect like,
yeah, it's a slurpy,
goopy, yeah.
And then she hears a gunshot. So she runs to the theater, and Greg, her friend, is dead. But before he died, he told the others that Jess shot him. And we're like, wait a minute, Jess was in the other room with Victor. While she's defending herself, someone from the upper level of the theater starts shooting. And they shoot Downey dead, and they injure Sally. And Jess takes off. She runs to the kitchen, and she gets a knife from the galley. And then she goes up to one of the upper levels. On that upper level, a masked person, like a trick-or-treat style bag over your head.
Yeah, like the strangers type thing or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Attacks her, and they fight. And she takes control of the fight and has the masked person leaning over the edge of one of the rails, and the masked person tells her that she has to kill them all. That's the only way home. And then the masked person falls into the ocean.
And to this movie's credit, it was a fairly low budget movie. Pretty good choreography, some cool fighting. Yeah, Jess had some good fight scenes.
Yeah, there was some good moves there.
Yeah, it did.
The only thing where I saw the budget come into play, I thought some of the cinematography inside the hallways of the ship was not very crisp. It was almost cloudy.
Yes.
And when the storm came, the
dark
CGI was a little weak.
Yeah.
but minor complaints.
Right.
So after she dumps the masked person over, she hears yelling, "Hey, hey, help!" and sees a group of survivors on an overturned sailboat, including herself. And the cycle starts over. They board
Yeah,
the
she
ship.
just has that moment like, oh my God. Yeah, she has that like panned moment. Like the camera kind of pans her face. Yeah.
So she boards the ship, and we start hearing the same conversations, the same things happening, looped over and over. Well, this Jess finds Victor alone out on the deck and tries to explain it to him. But while she's like trying to get him to understand, she impales the back of his head on a hook in the hallway, explaining the hole that the prior Victor had in his head when he comes back.
Which I actually like that. I actually like that because like I was like, oh, that's how it happened. And not only that, she's not being mean or threatening. She's just like, you have to listen to me.
Yeah.
And like it just happens like an accident. Like and I just kind of thought that was clever. I kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was like, okay, this really is a full, complete circle.
Yeah. It was interesting.
Jess finds a note in her own handwriting, reiterating the message that she has to kill them all. She gets, and I like this scene. She goes and gets a gun from the armory, and she drops her locket, and it kind of falls down and then falls through a grate. And then the camera goes into the grate, and we see there's dozens of the same lockets in there.
Well, and that's the magnitude of the situation that she's up against. And it goes back to in the beginning, but they're on the Aeolus ship, and Aeolus was the father of Sisyphus, and Sisyphus was meant to carry the rock up the hill and let it fall back down endlessly for the rest of time, right? And so I like how they took these two scenarios and mashed them together. They have the ship, Aeolus, who's the like the god of like wind or whatever, and then he was the father of Sisyphus, and now they're like doomed to endlessly do this over and over and over again. And they kind of match that with Aeolus's father, who's the god of wind, and they're on a ship. So they kind of matched those two ideas together, I thought, really intelligently. And it was cool that, like you said, that locket scene just shows the magnitude of it.
But then that was like a trigger moment for me because it's like, okay, this is weird that there's a second set, and it's the first time you go, okay, it's not a second set.
This has been happening.
This has been happening over and over and over and over again.
Which makes me really like the ending. We'll get to that at the ending.
Yeah. She goes back and comes face to face with herself. And Victor is there and sees them both. She basically interrupts the fight scene that took place between her and Victor in the dining hall with a second her getting in the mix. She also now runs to the theater to try to rescue Sally and Downey, trying to break the pattern. Like she knows bad stuff happens. Now she's going to try to prevent it.
Right.
The killer Jess lures them away and kills Downey again and injures Sally. But Sally makes it out to the radio and calls for help. And this is another one of the aha moments. Her call is the exact call they heard on the radio when they were on the ship.
I love when movies do that, when they bring two things together like that and you get the aha moment. You almost kind of like, you get the satisfaction that you figured it out.
Yeah. Like, oh, that makes sense now.
Yeah. I connected the dots. Good for me.
Sally then crawls out from the radio room onto a little open air deck part of the ship, and she's dying from her wounds. And in a like a repeat of the locket moment, there's dozens of her dead bodies in various positions.
I thought was pretty gnarly. I like that. And as it pans out, you just see all the different versions of her body. I was like, oh man, this is brutal.
Yeah, she made it to like different parts of the thing before she collapsed.
Yeah.
It's just like a bucket of her dead bodies in this whole section of the ship.
Yeah. There's little scenes like that made me really enjoy this movie.
Jess watches. Now she's on the upper level, and she watches two versions of herself fight again. So now we know there's at least three Jesses on the ship, and she sees
it's just rats through maze.
The repeat of the one Jess beats the one and spills it over in the ocean with the same message, and she realizes that the scenario restarts when they all die. So she starts clearing out bodies becomes and what we think of as the master Jess, the one version we've been
Yeah, the
following
master
since
copy.
the beginning. Yeah. She becomes the killer version of herself, and she's going to reset it all with the idea of preventing them from boarding again. Another Jess fights her, and at this point it's a little hard to follow which Jess is which.
Yeah, I think you have to. I went through the one that looks like John McClane in Die Hard, because if you watch the master copy, like she starts to look, she's barefooted with like the tank top that's dirty and like
Yeah. Yeah, and that's they're all dressed a little bit differently. The one's got
Yeah.
the bag, and now we know the bag person is actually her.
right.
But our main version of Jess goes overboard this time, and it kind of ends the whole scenario on the ship. We see her actually wake up on a beach. She wakes up and she walks up the road headed towards home, and she goes to her house. And she looks in the window, and there's another version of Jess with Tommy, and that version of Jess is yelling at him, very short with him. She smacks him a couple times.
Yeah.
And she rings the bell and goes to the shed. In another aha moment, this was the doorbell ringing at the beginning when no one was there. She in the shed, she gets a hammer, she goes into the house, and she kills that version of herself.
And it's a gnarly kill. They show it. Like I was like, okay, yeah. It wasn't flashy and stuff. Like it's like a side screen. Oh, just comes right up to her.
Yeah, she's just wailing on flesh with that hammer.
Yeah.
And she hugs her son and says, "I'm sorry. That wasn't me. I'm going to be a better mom now." Which is at this point, it's like, okay, this is now not exactly where I thought this was going.
Exactly. Yeah.
She puts the body, zips it into a bag, puts it in the trunk, and drives off. And you're thinking, okay, are we headed to a happy ending here? And on the way, they hit a bird violently against the window, and there's blood splatter, and the bird's in the road, and Tommy gets upset, and she's like, all right, I'll take care of it. She gets out of the car, picks up the bird's mangled body, and walks it over to drop it off of a ledge where we see dozens of dead birds.
Yeah, just like Pam's body. Yeah,
and we
just
know
dozens of this has happened. This keeps happening, and it blows my mind because I was like, oh, so each mom, like every time in the very beginning scene when she's rushing him out to the to the car, rushing Tommy out to the car and putting stuff in the trunk, I was like, oh, this just keeps happening. Like that was the first scene at the beginning, but we didn't say what's the luggage she's getting, right?
Yeah, you didn't know it was a body in the trunk at that point.
It's a dead body. This just keeps happening in different versions of her. I was like, oh, that's a good ending.
Back in the car, she's now, the bird's disposed, and she's taken off to wherever they're headed to get rid of the body. And Tommy is crying, and she's turned around from her driving position trying to comfort him, and her eyes are off the road. They hit a truck head on, and the vehicle flips. And Tommy is dead in the road. And a man comes up, and he's a symbolic, the ferryman, the guider of souls.
Yeah, the cab
to me,
driver.
that's what he represents. He tells her, well, there's no helping him now. Is there anywhere I can take you?
Taking her through the river Styx, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and she says, yeah, you can give me a ride back to the harbor. And we see her back on the dock, walking down the original scene where she's disoriented and dazed to get on the ship and start it all over.
It's just an endless cycle that she'll have to go through.
It's an endless cycle.
And it's funny, there was a French philosopher that his name was Albert Camus, and I might be pronouncing his last name wrong, but Albert Camus, and he said, one must think of Sisyphus as being happy, because the meaning in life is to face seemingly meaningless, endless tasks, and then finding our ability to accept them, and finding freedom in our ability to choose to accept them, right? And so, it's interesting because people will sit there and say, "Oh, I have to get up and go to work every day." It's like, well, yeah. So you have something to do. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of like with Sisyphus, well, you can think of him as happy, and then you look at this movie and you're like, no, this is terrible. There's nothing to be happy about with this.
Right.
This is
Yeah,
the Sisyphus that I think they were trying to talk about, like just an endless loop of hell.
I found this movie to be interesting, deep. You could think about it a lot and pull it apart in a lot of different ways.
Mm,
It's never really scary in the true sense of that word.
yeah,
There's a little bit of blood. The hammer scene is probably the bloodiest it gets, but there's not a lot of blood.
yeah.
It's more interesting and curious and trying to figure out what's happening more so than any of those other things, in my opinion. But it's really well done movie.
Yeah, it's very well executed. It's a really fun watch. I enjoyed it. Like I said, like, you know, even if you think you figured it out, it's like that's okay. They're not trying to hide anything. You just watch it and they'll just take you through it. And it's actually the ending pays off. This wasn't the biggest budget movie ever, but I think everything's just done well. The characters aren't annoying, which is I kind of that made me happy. Like I just sometimes you watch like these group movies, these whodunit movies,
Yeah,
and some of the characters just annoy you. And like actually none of these I think all the actors and characters were done well.
yeah. The main character was played by Melissa George, and she did a very good job. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
usually it's a group of young people, and
Yeah.
these were a little older, maybe young adults or adults,
Yeah. And they weren't
and
too obnoxious. Like everyone was kind of their
yeah,
own person. Yeah. Yeah.
they didn't
Yeah.
play into all these ridiculous stereotypes
Like
and
we
over
saw
the
in like
top.
the Cube when we watched the Cube, it's a lot of it was over the top characters, right? Like this was just regular friends.
Yeah,
It
regular
was
people,
yeah, yeah. I thought it was all done well.
and certainly an interesting time loop that you don't necessarily expect. If you don't know going in, you're looking at this movie and you look at the cover and you think, oh, it's a haunted ship,
Right, right.
and
It, but
it's none of
it,
that.
it's like you said, it's much deeper. And you know what? That I think the concept of the movie is the horror, right? The
Yeah,
horror of having to do that, right? And losing your son and causing a car crash and watching your dead son and the whole thing is the horror in itself. Not so much that it's
absolutely.
spooky. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Jess's journey is a
It's a
awful
horror.
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, our second movie in this subject is from 2023, almost a brand new movie called Totally Killer, and it's directed by Nanachka Khan, not Chaka Khan, Nanachka Khan.
Yeah.
And this is a horror comedy that debuted on Prime, and I had not seen it before. I'd been meaning to watch it, and uh, this was an interesting movie. I actually enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it way more than I thought it was going to. It's very self-aware. It has a lot of parody to it. It knows it has parody to it. It's Hot Tub Time Machine, Back to the Future, like it's all this fun, wacky stuff, and they just have a blast with it. And it's Back to the Future, Heathers, and Michael Myers, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's
There,
all these
there's
it's all
actually
these tropes together, and it's just like the movie knows it. Like it's not
the
trying to, yeah.
absolutely, yeah. There's actually a scene where the masked killer is standing along a row of houses, standing on the sidewalk back in the distance. That is almost a duplicate shot of a scene from the original Halloween,
Right. Yeah.
only a different killer. But I would say,
and this
sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a horror comedy, I really put this one 90% in the comedy and 10% in the horror.
100%. I mean, it's really just it's comedy with some stab scenes, right? And
Right.
that's yeah.
Yeah, Hot Tub Time Machine with a butcher's knife.
Well, I
So-
bring up Hot Tub Time Machine because that movie is so ridiculous, and they go back in time to the '80s, and they do that in this one too. And she's just poking fun at the '80s and like culture, but it's also, I mean, when they do that, it's a way of using that old humor as well and getting away with it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're kind of like they're doing that on purpose to get away with it, and then poking fun of it. And I was like, they're having.
Yeah, you
fun with
read
it.
about all the famous movies from the 80s that have all these problematic scenarios, whether it's racial
Yeah.
characterization or homophobia or all these different things.
Just sexism in general. Yeah,
Yeah, and to me, that's the best part of this movie is when this 2023 teenage girl goes back to the 80s. She's just
yeah,
in the middle of all those awful stereotypes and
yeah.
bad jokes, and she's just pointing out how ridiculous it is.
But in a comic way. But yeah, yeah.
And
It
being a
was good.
child of the 80s, it's like it all rings so true. It's like, yeah, this is how
This is
awful
how it was. The
people were.
smoking with the kids in the car, and like the guy has the FBI shirt on, says like federal boob inspector.
Yeah.
And she's like, that's a really problematic shirt. And the guy's girlfriend's like, I like it. And they walk away. Like, she's just like, oh, like,
Yeah, the girl gets in the car with two kids and she's smoking so much you can't see the people in the car.
and people will think that's comedy. I'm like, actually, that's how it was.
That is how it was. Yeah.
It really was like that. Yeah.
I grew up in a family. I was the only person in my family that didn't smoke.
Yeah. Tell your kids that, like, hey, do you know we used to smoke in doctors' offices?
You go real old movies and you'll see doctors walk out of the
walk out with a cigarette.
with a cigarette in the middle of the hallway in a hospital. But yeah. So we start out in 1987. We see 3 girls are killed in October, all on their 16th birthday. And they're all stabbed 16 times and the killer's never caught. And it's called the Sweet 16
killer. Yeah.
In 2000, we move forward to 2023. And Jamie is going to a concert on Halloween with her friend Amelia. And her mother, Pam, is very nervous, doesn't like Halloween because she was friends with the 3 girls all those years ago. Well, she goes off to the concert. Pam's home alone handing out candy. And the killer shows up with the same mask, attacks Pam while she's handing out candy. And she struggles, but she ends up getting stabbed 16 times.
It almost seems like there's 2 killers or something. It's weird. Like,
yeah, it almost does. Jamie struggles with the loss of her mother and the return of the killer. And there's a character, a podcaster, Chris, who gives tours of the murder sites, and he claims to be an investigative reporter, and he basically knows everything about the Sweet 16 killer. And I find it funny that every time somebody who has a podcast is represented in a movie, they're just the biggest clown.
It's gonna be a trope we'll look back in 10 years and revisit. You know what I mean? Like, wow, you know what I mean? Like, because podcasting has become this massive, it's changed information, like, dissemination in media and news in a way that, like, I don't even think the world was ready for. Right. Yeah. And so, yeah, you think of it like, I think there's this old trope of, like, people from the early 2000s when people first started doing it, it was very esoteric. Right. And it was very almost like you had to be a computer dork to be involved. And I think we take that old trope and then put it with these characters nowadays. But it's like, it's funny how we've convoluted that.
Yeah. I'm tempted to be offended, but I don't get offended. So
I laugh. I
do
laugh.
too.
I think it's funny. Yeah.
So, Chris, he gives these tours and, he's supposed to be an investigator, and he befriends Jamie and Amelia in their search. And he gives Jamie a note that her mother received in 1987 saying, "You're next someday."
Which is funny in itself, someday. Like, not you're next. It's like, you're next someday. Like,
yeah.
I was like, everything about this movie is funny. They just threw humor in it constantly.
And she's like, my God, she's been living with this her whole life, not knowing what day you need to be looking over your shoulder. Amelia, of course, is a genius and is building a time machine for a science fair, which would win every science fair in the history of science fairs if you actually built a time machine.
Yeah,
built a time machine. But
it just looks like something she got from Five Below. Like, yep. It's real cheesy.
She's using an old photo booth at a carnival that's been shut down, and she's using the notes that her mother had made. Her mother was also a genius and had a notebook full of calculations and notes, and she's working off of that as a source material. Well, while they're walking around this old carnival, the killer attacks Jamie. And she goes and hides inside the old photo booth. And in doing so, she accidentally powers it up. The killer reaches inside and stabs, and missing her. And then the knife goes into the screen, adding an additional metal conductor, and turns the time machine on. And she goes back to 1987. She figures it out. She immediately talks to a woman who's wearing a hideous tracksuit and smoking with her 2 kids that it's 1987.
I can't remember what the name of the brand she said she was wearing.
I think it was Gloria Vanderbilt.
Yes, yeah. She's like, what did she call herself? A loser? Would a loser wear Gloria Vanderbilt? And she's like, no. She said, would a psycho killer wear Gloria Vanderbilt? And she goes, well.
Yeah, she says, it's 1987. Why aren't you in school? She's like, let me give you a ride. And she's like, I can't go in the car with you. You're a total stranger. You could be a psycho killer. She's like, Would a psycho killer wear Gloria Vanderbilt? And then she goes with her, and she gets out of the smoke car that you can't even see the people. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, this whole movie's ridiculous.
And very funny the stereotypes of the 80s that they play up.
Everything, yeah. And the cops too. The cops are outside smoking. Like, hey, get to school. We're gonna bust you. It's like, and they're having cigarettes,
And they're completely incompetent, right?
making fun of time machine movies, which is what they're doing, right?
So she walks into school and she says she's an exchange student from Canada, and they just hand her a schedule. And she's like, "That's it? You don't need to see anything?" She's like, "No." Again, going back to, pre 9/11 days, and when
People buying
information
liquor
wasn't
stores
so
at
secure.
17. Yeah. There wasn't. You could probably be 17, buy a pack of smokes and liquor, and you could just go into school. Yeah, back then everything was way more lax.
At one point, she asked the school secretary, "I know you probably can't share this information, but I'm really trying to locate this person, and I'm trying to figure out where they are right now." And she's like, "Chemistry room 229." She's like, "Oh, you just give that information out?" Like, yeah, why not?
It's very fourth wall. They do a lot of fourth wall stuff like that. Yeah.
She finds out her mom and the three friends that were killed are mean girl types, and everybody in the school hates them. She encounters Amelia's mom, Lauren, and convinces her by showing her cell phone, which came through with her, and telling her about the notes from the time machine. And she convinces her the truth. And she actually has a great line. She says, "Well, you can't have a notebook calculating how to build a time machine without considering the fact that somebody from the future may use it and come back and be talking to you."
Yeah. And I like how the mom just like bought into it without any like annoying, like, you know what I mean? She's like, okay, I'll go along. And the story moves forward. I was like, oh, that was kind of a relief. I hate when there's like too much tension between a character not believing something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. They cut back to 2023. Amelia tells everyone that Jamie went back in time through her time machine, but nobody really believes her, except for the podcaster who wants to help her.
Yeah.
Lauren and Jamie together go to the party where the first murder happened, and they're trying to prevent it. And they get hit with all the teen party scenarios from the 80s. The gay jokes. They're throwing nerds out.
The over-aggressive jocks, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like Revenge of the Nerds. They
Yeah,
keep throwing them out.
Get lost, nerds.
And all she's trying to do
it's the future principal and head coach too. That's what's funny.
Right, yeah.
They're the bullies.
Yeah. And they're just trying to save the first girl, trying to stop this whole thing from happening. And all they ended up doing is succeeding in changing the location of Tiffany's murder from the garage to her parents' bedroom. And then we see in the future, she was in the bedroom with a guy who went on to be the lead singer of a band. And the name
Eddie Royal.
And the name of his band changed to
Killer Instinct to One Waterbed Away.
One Waterbed Away became the name of his band because he almost lost his life that day.
Whoever thought of that in the writing room, they must have been laughing for an hour. Like,
she manages to convince her mom, Pam, that they are in danger, and they kind of start talking to each other, even though she's not in the in crowd, and she never tells Pam that she's her daughter. She tells her she's a psychic. That's how she sees all these things.
She believes her. And you know what I love? Another thing that was really funny about this movie, she travels back in time and meets her parents, and her parents are like, they would never hang out with her. They think she's a dork.
Yeah. Yeah, her parents are both like
They're
awful.
mean to her. Yeah.
They're like super shallow and awful people. And it's like,
Yeah.
And she keeps accidentally like getting mad and going and saying, "Mom." And then she subtly rolls into "Mamacita. What are you thinking?"
Or some other word. Yeah.
And she's like, "Why do you keep calling me that?" So they don't end up saving the first girl. So Marissa's next on the list, and Marissa dies in a cabin in the woods at her birthday party, of course. And so Jamie's telling her, "Hey, let's forget about the cabin. We don't want to be there. Let's go to the city. Let's go where there's a lot of people around." Yeah. And she's like, "Well, my parents do have a condo we could go to." She's like, "Oh, that's perfect." Marissa doesn't know the difference between a condo and a cabin. and they end up at the same cabin anyways, because Jamie fell asleep on the way and didn't realize where they were going.
Right. Yeah. She's tired.
Despite the group's best efforts to stop the killer, they all fight with him and encounter him at one point. He ends up killing Heather, who's normally was third on the list. She gets killed second, and Marissa lives. So the order's now changed, but still one of the three girls died.
Right. Yeah. Like it's still the time loop is still happening. It's just things are changing.
And back in 2023, they're seeing the ripple effects of this, where the podcaster's saying, all my notes say she died in the garage, and now I have a picture of her dying in the bedroom on the waterbed. And like, I know this girl died second, but now it says this girl died second. Like,
and they bring up the Mandela effect. She's like, well, it's the Mandela effect, like how you remember a certain thing, like the Berenstein Bears thing, right?
yeah. It's pretty cool as they go back and forth. Blake, who is Jamie's dad, questions the sheriff's daughter's Kara, who is the sheriff in 2023 now, and wants to know why wasn't she there fighting the killer? Where did she go? How come she disappeared? Basically accusing her that maybe it was her the whole time. And she gets mad and runs off. Jamie is suspecting this guy Damon, who they all call Lurch, because he's creepy, he's quiet. Again, stereotyping people based on their appearance and certain characteristics.
To be fair, when they're in the science classroom and she sits next to him, he gets ready to close his notebook and it says "shoot everybody."
Yeah.
So for the audience sake, it's like, well, maybe don't write that in your book.
Right. She breaks into Damon's creepy van and just finds he's got video games and nothing else, and he catches her.
Yeah, he says, "Don't take my video games," and she was like, "I don't want them." And he's like, "But they're the only thing that are of value."
We're like, "Why else would you be in my van?" And it becomes clear it's not him. He's a shy guy with no fighting skills, which we saw the killer
clearly had
tremendous fighting skills when he was fighting off all the people at the cabin. So the group sets up a trap at the carnival, the site of the final murder, and they convince Marissa to go into the house of horrors. Everyone else is hiding in efforts to protect her. I did find, one of the things that's funny about this movie is these girls are all just turning 16, and they portray them all as like the biggest whores. Right? Did you notice this?
Yeah. I think it goes back to like maybe it's the 80s thing. I wasn't a teenager in the 80s. I was a kid, but I don't know if that was like a thing.
Yeah, like they're like, just go hide in there, like pretend you're blowing somebody. Like,
and
I've done that a ton of times.
She's walking through the haunted house. She's like, "Randy, I'm ready to give you a blowjob now," like sarcastically. Like, it's like it's funny though.
It's like, this is as improper as all the movies in the 80s were.
Yeah. Again, it's an excuse to use that humor, right? To make fun of it, but then while you're using it at the same time, right? But you get away with it, right?
So regardless, the trap is laid in the house of horror, and the killer takes the bait, and he goes after her, but the whole group jumps out, and they're all fighting. And we see this killer is a skilled fighter, and everyone's trying to protect Marissa. And finally, Kara, the person who was accused of being the killer, puts a scythe right through his midsection, finally eliminating the killer. And she goes, "See, told you it wasn't me."
That's all she cared about. It wasn't me.
They pull the mask off, and it was Doug, who we should have suspected because he told us he told the group he had been taking karate for 8 years, and he was basically the hall monitor. And we don't know why he did it, but then we learned that that the group of girls played a prank on his girlfriend, got her drunk to get some information out of her, and then let her drive home, and she died.
And this is where Scream messed me up, because Scream movies had me thinking. I saw Scream when I was like 13 when it came out, 12 or 13, and it was always, we're gonna make you think it's this person, but it's not, and then we're gonna make you think it's this person, it's not. So now whenever I watch movies, I have that problem. So I was like, it might be Doug. I was like, but I bet it's not Doug, because it has, there's still 40 minutes left in the movie.
And you think about, this look at this movie is 90% funny. It's not really a horror film.
Yeah.
But
It's a fun homage to these kinds of movies.
that scene is pretty dark because it's these girls got this other girl ridiculously drunk and let her drive home, and she killed her and she died.
And Jess brings that up. She's like, "You killed somebody,"
She
and they're
gets
just
she
like,
gets upset.
"Yeah."
Jamie's like, and she's chastising the group and chastising her mother for being a part of this. And then she finds out her mother wasn't there. She actually wasn't a part of it, which was the reason she wasn't killed in 1987. And
Yeah, it
Jamie
kind of brings
wonders,
the
wonders, well, I wonder why you even got that, get the note. And right as that happens, another killer appears with the same mask and slits Marissa's throat.
yeah.
And meanwhile, Lauren, her best friend's mom, has been building a new time machine to get Jamie's back. They need to do it at just the right time because they need to use the broadcast power of the news reporter, and they need her to have battery on her cell phone for this to work. But the new killer chases her, and they're going to use one of the carnival rides. New killer chases her into the carnival ride, and they fight.
Yeah, the quantum drop. Right?
The quantum drop, yes.
The thing that goes around really fast and holds you against the wall.
Yeah, like a gravitron. It's got a lot of different names, but it's a puke machine.
Yeah.
They fight inside, and the mask comes off, and the killer is the podcaster Chris. And his sole motivation was he wanted the murders to remain relevant and to help his career and to help his podcast.
Which is actually super humorous in itself, that some like a reporter would like continue to make a story relevant by killing people so they could still have a platform.
Yeah, and it's almost a twist on, if you ever saw the movie Nightcrawler.
Yeah. I love that movie.
Yeah. Where you start to cover the news so close, you start to create the news. It's just kind of his MO here. But the machine gets spinning at a high speed, and Jamie finally kicks Chris loose, and he kind of splatters against the wall in just a pink mist. Like he just completely disintegrates.
Which is an inside joke to the movie because they talk about pink mist graphics in video games in 1987. Yeah.
Yep. And he became a pink mist.
Yeah.
So she returns home. The carnival grounds are run down and unoccupied now rather than thriving like it was in 1987. When she gets out, everything's run down. It's just as it was in 2023. She runs home looking for her mom. The whole purpose of this was could she save her mom's life and prevent the killer. She's looking for her mom. Boom. Her mom and dad are there. They're the same. And she thinks everything's the same. But her best friend Amelia and her mom Lauren arrive, and Lauren is wink wink in on this because in 1987 she helped her and sent her back.
Yeah.
So a young guy shows up and just walks in the house and says, "Hey," and she's like, "Who was that?" And Lauren explains to her, based on the events that you changed, your parents got together 4 years earlier. You have an older brother named Jamie now, and your name is now Colette.
Yeah.
But her best friend's still Amelia.
Which I think might be is that like a little nod to Toni Collette from
I certainly think it was. That was
I
my
thought it
guess
was.
as well.
Yeah, like Toni Collette, yeah, the horror queen. Well, not one of them. Yeah.
And they're basically a big happy group. Her parents are together. She's got an older brother now. And her best friend and her mom they're all good friends, and they all hang out together. So
she's got a notebook of stuff that's different. She's like, you might want to start reading this.
Yeah, Lauren gives her. I've been keeping track, which
goes right back to the notebook thing, right? Because she had a notebook of the time machine. I thought that was a little teeny,
But here's a question, and time travel movies can be confusing.
Oh, they can be as crazy as you want them to be.
If Lauren lived her normal life up to 1987, helped Jamie, and then sent her back, how does she know the differences between 1987 2023 original compared to post change? She wouldn't have lived any of those years.
I don't think she knew the differences. I think she just wrote down big moments, right? Well,
the book was called Things That Are Now Different.
Well, I bet because everything's probably different, right? Like here are the type of cell phones we use. Here were the presidents. Here were here were the champions of this sport. And you just read through it, it's like, oh, this is all different. Do you know what I mean? Like you would just list big things that happened. You know what I mean? Like if you could think of big events that happen every year, we all know them. Like there's at least 20 big things that happen every year. So she kept notes throughout the year. She's like, here, just read this. Like here's everything that changed.
It seems like to me there's always
yeah.
parts of time travel movies that don't make sense, or at least I can't get my simple head around them.
Right. And that's how I took it. Like she just wrote down all the big events and like, just read this. You know what I mean? Like, right. I don't know. That's one way to look at it.
This
But
movie
yeah,
I thought was very enjoyable as a
I thought it was
comedy.
hilarious.
It's really funny. It's really self-aware. It's really it really pokes fun at the 80s pretty hard and pretty direct. And again, as a child of the 80s, I found it to be very, very funny. It's not scary at all. It's not really that bloody, but it's a good time.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a couple vicious stabbing scenes, and that's about it. There's no eye scenes.
Yeah, I don't know. We got to do something about that for next week.
Yeah, we will. But
So,
like you
yeah.
said, it's a fun movie. I really enjoyed it way more. You know, it's an hour and a half movie, and it went by in a snap. I was like, oh, that was a fun movie.
Yeah,
It was easy.
there's no filler. It's funny, and it just moves right along.
Yep.
Yeah, and I actually thought the mask was pretty cool. I think it's a riff on the Halloween mask where they took a
100%.
William Shatner mask and painted
Yeah.
it white and cut the eye holes bigger.
Yep.
You know, this just looks like, I don't know, it could be, I don't know, it could be one of the Jonas Brothers. It's a very generic.
Yeah, it reminded me of that video game Fallout. If you look up the video game Fallout, like Fallout 4 and stuff, like they have that generic smile man. I don't know what it was.
Yeah, but it's just a generic dude mask.
Yeah.
And yeah, good movie. In our category, certainly fits. Neither one of our movies this week were tremendously scary or bloody,
No.
but they still had very good merits in what they are.
Good value, and they're both watchable. I'd recommend both. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, that is our episode this week. We thank you as always for listening. We are the Weekly Horoscope. I'm Jerry, and that's Matt, and we will see you next time. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.